So today we're going to cover Chapter 13, Section 3 and 4. We're going to look at the presidencies of William Howard Taft and Woodrow Wilson. We'll talk about William Howard Taft first. William Howard Taft, really his first love was law, and his ultimate goal was he wanted to be Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And he was a practicing lawyer in Ohio, and he was continuously getting promoted to higher and higher courts. And then, next thing you know, Taft finds himself in the Philippines helping them set up their government. Now, it wasn't something Taft really wanted to do. However, Taft took the job and he excelled at it. He did a very good job. You know, one thing about Taft is that he really, he wasn't a person that liked being in a position where there was a lot of attention drawn to him. Even though he didn't want to be in the Philippines, he could do a good job and he didn't have to worry about a lot of people paying attention. I mean, the Filipino people were still upset about being controlled by the government, by the United States. And, you know, people back here in the U.S., they could care less who was in charge of the Philippines and what they were doing. When Roosevelt is president, he brings Taft back, and Taft is serving in his cabinet. And eventually, Taft is talked to by Roosevelt. So I had to take a pause there. So anyway, so Taft is part of Roosevelt's cabinet, and Roosevelt sees the job that Taft is doing, and he says, you know what? This is the guy that needs to succeed me as president. And so Roosevelt invites Taft and his wife to the White House. And because Roosevelt has decided, I'm not going to run for re-election in 1908. He can if he wants to, because there's no constitutional amendment yet limiting a president to 2 terms. Roosevelt has served 2 full terms. He can go for a third if he wants, but he doesn't want to. 2 terms is enough. Roosevelt wants to go on safari in Africa. So he tells Taft, he says, William, I want you to be the next president of the United States. I want you to continue on with the Republican Party being in charge of the White House. And Taft, kind of looks at him and says, well, thank you, but I'd rather not. And of course, Roosevelt is just kind of dumbfounded, because who in the world would not want to be president of the United States? Roosevelt is extremely popular. Roosevelt has told Taft, I will put all of my support behind you, and with that, you're going to be president. And Taft's like, yeah, but I don't want to be president. And you have to remember, again, Taft did not like being in the spotlight. Well, Taft's wife pulls him aside, and she tells him, she's like, what are you doing? He goes, I don't want to be president. She said, well, you may not want to be president, but I want to be first lady. And so Taft goes back to Roosevelt and he says, okay, I'll do it. I'll be your president. Sad thing is, only about 3-4 months after Taft, the Tafts move into the White House, his wife suffers a stroke. She's never able to fully enjoy the experience of being the first lady of the United States. So Taft is the president, 1909 to 1913. And really during that time period, if you look at what was going on in the United States, there just wasn't a lot happening. Europe is licking its wounds from World War I. Russia is licking its wounds from having been beat up by the Japanese in the Russo-Japanese War of 1906. Japan's slowly trying to spread its empire in the Pacific. On a worldwide scene, though, there just isn't a lot going on in the world. And so Taft decides that he's going to focus his attention on breaking up the trust. This was one of the things that Roosevelt was very focused on. In fact, Roosevelt is given the nickname the Great Trust Buster. But the thing is, Taft actually took on and broke up more trusts than Roosevelt did. Like I mentioned, Roosevelt wanted to go on safari. He does that. Now, Taft did not want to be president. He didn't like it. It caused him a lot of stress, and everybody deals with stress differently. Taft's coping mechanism was he ate, and he ate some more, and he ate some more. And about 1 year, roughly 1 year after Taft had become president, he had gained just over 100 pounds. Now, Taft was already a big guy to begin with. You were talking a guy that was, 6'3" in that range and weighed about 2.25. So he's a good sized guy. And, about a year, he gains 100 pounds. He's averaging almost 9 pounds a month that he's putting on. And so now he's pushing close to 3.25. And unfortunately for Taft, it's rumored that he goes to take a bath one night and he gets stuck in the tub and he can't get out. And so eventually he has to, summons the staff for help, and they're eventually able to get him back. Now, conventional wisdom would maybe tell Taft that it's time to go on a diet, but Taft had really struggled with his weight during presidency. He'd go on a diet and he'd do well and he'd lose some weight, but then he'd go and find it. And not only did he find it, but he found some extra weight. And so he was just constantly yo-yoing up and down. And so Taft's like, I want to avoid this embarrassment. I don't want it to happen again. So what does Taft do? He orders a new tub put in the White House. And it's said that this tub was large enough that 3 full-size grown men could easily fit in the tub.
President William Howard Taft was the 27th President of the United States. He served from 1909 until 1913. After his presidency, he served as the Chief Justice of the United States. He is the only person in the history of the United States to have served as the head of both the judicial and executive branches of government. President Taft was born on September 15, 1857 in Cincinnati, Ohio. His father was a lawyer who pushed President Taft to do well in school and work hard. He went on to study at Yale College in New Haven, Connecticut. He later attended Cincinnati Law School and began studying law. He graduated in 1880, and then after working in several law positions, he was appointed a Superior Court judge in Cincinnati in 1887. In 1886, he married his sweetheart, Helen Herron. They had 3 children together named Robert, Helen, and Charles. Herron was a great supporter to President Taft throughout their 44 years of marriage. In 1891, President Taft served as a judge in the newly created United States Court of Appeals for the 6th Circuit. He also began teaching constitutional law at the University of Cincinnati. But in 1900, life changed for President Taft, and he was appointed by President McKinley to be the chairman of a commission that was helping the Philippines start their own government. President Taft wasn't too excited about this because he really wanted to be on the Supreme Court, but he moved to the Philippines and helped get their government up on its feet and running. In 1904, President Taft came back to the United States and was appointed by President Roosevelt to be the Secretary of War. In this job, he met with many world leaders and formed alliances. In 1908, many people felt that he was ready to run for president. President Taft wasn't so sure he wanted to be president, but he knew that he could do a lot of good. President Taft did not like campaigning. It felt awkward to him and made him uncomfortable, but he won and was the president from 1909 until 1913. During President Taft's term, he created the United States Chamber of Commerce, reorganized the State Department so that it was operating for the current times, worked to improve foreign relationships, and established corporate income tax. President Taft ran for re-election, but was almost relieved that he didn't win. He went on to do what he wanted to do all along, be a Supreme Court judge. He became the Chief Justice, and he also taught law at Yale University. President Taft passed away on March 8, 1930. He will always be remembered for his love of law and America.
I was thinking though.
So, little short bio on Taft. Now, Taft, of course, Roosevelt was considered to be our first progressive president. And so Roosevelt's thinking, I'm going to go do my thing. I'm going to go to Africa. I'm going to go on safari, and everything is in good hands. And when he gets back, he's gone for about a year and a half, and he gets back, and right away he's reading newspapers, and he's being contacted by old political friends that are still involved in Congress, and they're like, "Where'd you find this guy? This guy is not a progressive president. In fact, he's almost anti-progressive." And Roosevelt was beside himself. He just couldn't believe what Taft was doing, and he looked at some of the policies that Taft had incorporated, and he was just flabbergasted by them. And Roosevelt, being Roosevelt, he was very, very outspoken. And as we learned earlier, Roosevelt was a very athletic, very energetic guy, and Taft was just the opposite. And so the 1912 election rolls around, and Roosevelt says, "Well, that's it. I wasn't planning on being a 3-term president, but I've got to go back and I've got to fix everything that Taft has screwed up." Now, you have to remember, Taft didn't really want to be president to begin with. At the same time, he doesn't want to be bullied out of not being president. And even though Roosevelt was popular amongst the American people, he was not all that popular amongst the Republican Party, because I said last week that Roosevelt was as much of a Democrat as he was a Republican. He was a bipartisan president, and Republicans didn't like that. They didn't want Roosevelt following Democratic policy. At the same time, the Democrats wanted their own Democratic president. Roosevelt thought for sure, well, I'm going to get the nod. Well, he didn't. The Republicans actually nominate Taft. And Roosevelt says, that's fine. If they want Taft, they can have him. I'm going to go and form my own political party. Now, he forms the Progressive Party, and it was said that at one point, someone had commented about Roosevelt's age and that he was too old to be president. And he made the comment that, well, I am as fit as a bull moose. And so the nickname of the Progressive Party was the Bull Moose Party. So I'm going to end this video lecture now, and then I'm going to start the second video. The second video lecture is going to start with the election of 1912, because we've seen, especially in 1916, how ugly presidential elections can get, and 2020 is not going to be any different. 1912 kind of helped set the tone a little bit.